We've got just a couple more guests to go today. I'm excited for this next guy. He is someone who I worked in the music industry at the beginning of my career, so this guy kind of specifically piques my interest just because of his history. He was actually the first non-founding employee of the infamous music technology company called Napster. He went on to be the first employee and the CEO of Snowcap, a digital media services company, which was acquired by iMeme, where he continued as a COO until iMeme was acquired by MySpace. So essentially, if there was a major name in 2000s tech, he was a part of it. Nowadays, he serves as the CEO of Sporcle, a trivia behemoth, serving both the internet and pubs and online trivia these days across the United States. He's coming to us from his house in Northern California, so please put your virtual hands together for our friend, Ali Aydar.
Thanks a lot, Ben. Excited to be here.
Thank you.
All right, let me share my screen and make sure I get this right and get these slides right. All right, is that working, Ben?
Looking good.
Looking good. Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk today about my 2 decades here in Silicon Valley and what I've learned. And I like to call what I've learned the foundational constructs of business. So I'm going to get into 3 specific areas that I have learned about business that I believe are really, really foundational to building any company. So first, I know Ben just went through this a little bit, but let me characterize it a little more. So I currently run Sporcle. I've been doing that for 10 years. Sporcle is a media and entertainment business focused on trivia. And Sporcle, the interesting thing about Sporcle, and it's relevant to one of my constructs, is that Sporcle is bootstrapped. So we don't have any outside money, and in fact, we don't have any inside money. We just started making money from day one. And then prior to that, 11 years at the 3 companies that Ben mentioned, Napster, Snowcap, and iMeme, all venture-backed. These 3 companies together raised a little over $200 million. There are three components that I feel like a lot of folks don't think about as they're building their businesses. And these are things that I notice as I look at others and as I look at my past, quite frankly. And I'm going to go through each of these. So one is corporate structure. The second is what I call core beliefs. And the third is something called well-differentiated leadership. So first I'll start with corporate structure. Okay. And so there's this question around the difference between venture-backed and bootstrapped. And I can even extend this to say, not just say venture-backed, but to say taking any outside investment, whether it's friends or family or a small partner that you bring into the business versus bootstrapping it yourself. This is a question that a lot of folks just kind of ignore. And sometimes people are going straight to just raising money because that's what they read about in the press, that's what's exciting, or they think that that's really the only way to make it work. And sometimes, depending upon what you're trying to build, that is the only way to make it work. But there are also a lot of businesses that could be bootstrapped that are venture-backed instead, and they run into trouble as a result. So let me talk about the differences here. So first, let me talk about venture-backed, and I use this picture of a guy snowboarding off a cliff, and I like this picture because it really represents the thrill and the risk, if you will, associated with a venture-backed opportunity. So there are high returns available here, but there's also very high risk. And And what we read about in the press are typically the ones that are really successful. What we don't read about are the 70 to 80% of venture-backed firms that don't work out, that don't go out of business. They're quickly swept under a rug. And so we're biased to those types of high returns and as our understanding of the outcome of venture-backed businesses. The second thing is you get less autonomy in a venture-backed business. You've got board members and investors who want a tremendous amount of control. And then finally, you've got less life balance. So I don't like calling it work-life balance because in many ways, work ends up being life, whether you're venture-backed or bootstrapped. But when you're venture-backed, time is really important. You're trying to generate return for your investors. And in order to maximize their return, they need that return to come in. As the earlier it comes in, the higher rate of return they make. And so you've really got to focus your life on the venture. Then with bootstrap companies, so I like this picture here that kind of depicts the bootstrap company of a guy digging a hole. And there's a few things to notice in this picture. First of all, digging a hole like this is hard work. And it takes time. You can't just go and dig a hole this big and just be done with it. But also, I like to note the craftsmanship here. That hole is really well dug. It's almost perfectly dug. And you can imagine that it took a grind for him to dig that hole. And so in the bootstrap world, you're grinding out what I would call traditional rates of return, not exponential returns. That means you have lower risk. But what you get for that is you get sole autonomy, you retain control. A lot of times in situations where investors come in, even friends and family, you end up being driven by their financial expectations, their financial goals, and not by your own goals. And so when you're bootstrapped, you really keep that autonomy. And then finally, your life profile is different. Life is what you make of it. And if you want to or need to work today, then you do. If you don't, then you don't. And that's where the autonomy and control extends to, not just in your business, but in your life. So this is something I actually tweeted about a few months ago. I believe that this is one of those things that is the single biggest decision around a company at its formation and at different inflection points when you're deciding how quickly you want to grow the business. Because you end up, whichever way you go, and again, there's validity to both ways, whichever way to go affects how you treat your customers, how you treat your employees, how you operate internally, and how you go about your life. So then the question then is, how do you choose? And look, if you're buying businesses on Flippa, and if you're buying a larger business and you require outside money, or you're stitching smaller businesses together, you will ultimately one day potentially have this choice. And there is validity in either. And as you saw in my career, I've done both. What's important is understanding how you choose. And for me, I can really boil it down to one word, and that word is trade-offs. And everything really here is a trade-off. So trade-offs being, are there really large potential returns here? Or are the returns small? Do you want to deal with high risk or do you want to deal with low risk? Do you want complete autonomy or are you okay with partial autonomy? Do you want to just be focused on this and your life is really focused on this, or do you want to be multidimensional? These are the types of trade-offs that you have to make. And when you make this choice, and it's okay, whatever you pick, as long as what you're picking, you're doing it with your eyes wide open and you're thinking about the fact that you're making these trade-offs. Because if you don't, you end up like this guy. So this is a quote that I heard from somebody, a startup entrepreneur here, who made the choice of going venture back and was so overwhelmed with being in a venture back startup. He said, should I just divorce my wife so I could work more? And so don't be this guy. Think about this choice, make an active choice, and then proceed. Okay, so that's the first fundamental construct. So the second thing is around core beliefs. And there are these three core questions around this. So what do you believe? What is your purpose? And what are your values? So these questions are critically important. And before I get into the reasons why and why not, I'll just say at the outset of this section that when I say this to folks, a lot of people kind of roll their eyes and it's like, oh, this is too touchy-feely, or it's too woo-woo, or whatever. But the answers to these questions really form the foundation for lots of things that your business ends up doing. So let me get into that. So this quote from Jason Fried, who wrote the book Rework, this is from the book Rework: when you don't know what you believe, everything becomes an argument. Everything is debatable, but when you stand for something, decisions are obvious. And this is why understanding your core beliefs is so important. Because when you don't understand your core beliefs, you go off on tangents, you waste a bunch of time, and you're not on firm ground. So here's just an example of my current company, Sporcle, and how we encapsulate our belief, purpose, and values. So our belief is we believe in making knowledge fun for everyone. Our purpose is to create mentally stimulating diversions that bring people together, and our values are do better, truth, and inclusion. So because we have these three things, everything else naturally flows from them. When we were at a time where these weren't clearly defined, there were constant arguments, debates, should we do this, should we do that? One person thinking we're doing one thing, another person thinking we're doing another, and it becomes messy and confusing. So when you do define who you are, and you define the belief, purpose, values, you get this internal alignment, especially if your business grows. And as your business grows, what happens is not everybody, as the business gets bigger, not everybody can talk to everybody every day. And so if you don't have these things defined, people won't necessarily row the same direction, right? So having these things defined allows people to row the same direction. It allows people to have this same decision-making lens, and it allows people to communicate clearly. There's a language that people are familiar with, that they understand, that allows them to communicate clearly. And when you don't, what happens is misalignment, people often rowing different directions, sometimes even against each other. You don't have consistent decision frameworks. And so decisions are just made on whims or personal views that one might have at the time. And oftentimes you can be in agreement with someone, yet because you don't have that shared language, it doesn't appear that you're in agreement because you're talking past each other. And so that's the power of having this belief purpose mindset set up in your organization. Now, again, I'll say, like, a lot of people are like, well, you know, I don't really have to do this. It's a little touchy-feely. I'll tell you, as a startup veteran, as a CEO, and as somebody who has been invited in as a consultant or advisor to dozens of startups in Silicon Valley the last 21 years. The companies that don't do this are the ones that end up turning into a bit of a mess. And you see this time and time again when you go into organizations. So if you don't do this, that's your choice, but proceed with caution. Finally, the last fundamental construct, as I'm calling it, is this concept of a well-differentiated leader. And let me just, that's often a thing where it's like, well, what does that even mean? Does that mean a good leader? And it means a little bit more than that. So let me describe what that is. But first, let me give you this quote. This one comes from a guy by the name of Edwin Friedman, who was who's a Jewish rabbi, and but also a therapist and an executive coach for 30 years. And so he had this very wide-ranging view of families, individuals, and organizations. And he's got this book called A Failure of Nerve, which I believe is one of the best business books of all time. Certainly the best leadership book of all time. And he says this in that book. He says, without question, the single variable that most distinguished companies that survived and flourished from those that disintegrated was the presence of a well-differentiated leader. So let me talk about what that even is, and what even is a well-differentiated leader. So a well-differentiated leader is someone who has established clear goals about him or herself. So there is no murkiness about where that person is going and why. A well-differentiated leader is also somebody who is connected with their people and with what they're trying to do, but also is separate enough so that there's comfort in who they are and enough space there to challenge the people around them. So in other words, they're not so comfortable that they're chummy that they're then afraid of pushing their organization in certain ways. And then finally, and this is actually most importantly, the ability to manage one's reactivity. So to the extent you're a well-differentiated leader is one that can manage their own reactivity while everyone else is reacting. And that allows them to react calmly and take stands in times that are difficult. Now, you might be thinking, whoa, where did all this come from? Like I was talking about corporate structure a minute ago, and now I've jumped the shark all the way to something called well-differentiated leadership. And my reason for that is just how universal this really is. That this really applies everywhere. I just saw this tweet from last night, and I decided to add it at the last minute to my slides, that kind of encapsulates one part of of what I'm talking about here. This is a venture capitalist, Josh Felser, and he says, I'd take a stellar founder with a mediocre idea 100 times over a mediocre founder with a stellar idea. And yet it's not just that the stellar founder knows what they're doing and has experience or whatever, but as Friedman says, that type of leader is less likely to become lost in the anxious emotional processes swirling about. And this is so important because when you're building a business, you're going to come across difficult things that where you have to make some very difficult decisions. And if we're caught up too much in our emotions around it, we tend to make the wrong decisions because we've got so much anxiety. We'll make a decision that is more for satisfying or pacifying our anxiety than it is for as the right thing for the business. And so this is the type of thing that you see in anytime again I'm brought into organizations where there are problems. Almost universally, there is leadership that has not been able to handle the emotional processes swirling about it. Now, the one thing you'll note here is I could have talked about all these other boxes here because traditionally when people talk about, well, what makes a business successful? Well, it's product market fit, or it's got a good business model, or there's good distribution or sales strategy or talent or technology or whatever. And to be sure, all those things are critically important. The argument I'm making today is these layers underneath, core beliefs, well-differentiated leadership, and corporate structure are the foundation that makes all these other things possible. And if these foundational things don't have good structure or start to crumble, then these things above it start to fall apart. So that's all I have today. I'm sorry for the weird audio issues. And this is how you can reach me if you want to get in touch. I love geeking out about this type of stuff.
Appreciate it. It's fantastic. We have a couple minutes. I'll see if your video wants to work now. I know you're having an issue before.
There I am.
There you are. Beautiful. You're stunning. We'll try to fit a couple quick questions in here. We only have about 3 minutes until our next speaker. We had one come in a little earlier from Hari, who's been with us the whole time. I was curious if the core beliefs that you've had for the businesses you've run, if those evolved over time, if you've changed those.
Honestly, they haven't. They depending on how long you run it, they can certainly evolve a little bit, but they really become the bedrock for who or what you are, and if you stay true to that bedrock, over time, it actually calcifies even more because that's where all of your attention goes. So they actually get stronger. So it's actually very rare that it changes that much.
Interesting. And you obviously you went from digital music to the world of online trivia. Did those core beliefs kind of shift to that, or what was the connection between the opportunity that you saw, the core beliefs that you had in starting Sporcle?
Well, look, for me, music, I had to get out of the music business. Don't do anything in the music business, people. It's a tough business, unless it's like an ad-supported website. The music is tough. Um, I saw a lot of opportunity just in building an online community. And it was the community building aspect of Sporcle that brought me over to Sporcle, because it was easy to build communities around music. Those kind of exist also in the offline world. Around trivia, there really wasn't one. And so I could bring my community mindset to Sporcle.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. There's such a tribal aspect to music that to be able to bring that to trivia or to anything else is pretty special. Let's see if I can get you one quick question. We got probably 60 seconds here before our next speaker. I know that you are a registered buyer at Flippa. What are you looking for when you're kind of browsing our marketplace?
Well, something, I'll be consistent, something that fits with our core beliefs, something that fits with what we believe our purpose is, and our values, and anything that allows us to enhance our belief and our purpose is what we're looking for.
Fantastic. Really appreciate you being here today. I know you got a busy schedule and quite a bit going on in your personal and business life. So
yes,
thank you
all right,
a ton. It's fantastic.
all right, thanks a lot.